exciting because we're hosting somebody that has been hosting amazing events in South Africa, and this is somebody who's worked in advertising, digital transformation, and is the founder and CEO of Heavy Chef. And the name Heavy Chef comes from you cannot trust a skinny chef. So you trust people who eat their own food. In other words, you trust people who walk their talk. And Heavy Chef hosts some of their most amazing tech and leadership events in South Africa. So ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite you to get on your feet, get up on your feet, and give a warm round of applause. Welcome to Roed. Welcome to Startup Grind. Super exciting to host you.
Thanks for having me. Evening, everybody.
Yeah, and I've been trying to. We most of the times we had similar events, but it's so hard to get you to sit here next to me and have this event. I felt like it was much easier to get President Cyril Ramaphosa.
I'm going to be honest with you, I think I feel like I should be interviewing you, you know? I feel kind of out of place and a little bit strange. So I might take a bit of I might need to warm into this, because I feel like I'm normally sitting where you sit and asking the questions. So go easy on me.
It's kind of like, but you're the heavyweight, right? You're the heavy chef. So it's like Ellen interviewing Oprah, you know?
I'll try and make it easy.
So, yeah, the party started. Great. So, Fred, welcome, and
thank you.
Just like to tell us about your background. You're born in South Africa and went born from Danish parents.
Sure.
And then went back to Denmark. So which one are you? I'm trying to figure out whether you're right now.
So I'm Ragnar. I base my look on Ragnar. Does anyone watch Vikings here? Yes.
It's a Viking.
I wish I was as good looking as that guy, but I'm working on it, you know. So
hair, like Beyonce's hair, you've got it.
Yeah. As I said, I'm working on it. It takes a while. But thank you, Sandras, and I apologize for not coming on earlier. But as you know, this is quite a busy endeavor, and I think just a word of support for you guys. I'm a massive fan of Startup Grind, as I mentioned earlier. Has anyone here been to the international Startup Grind event in Silicon Valley or the UK? You should go. It is by far the best business tech leadership event that I've ever been to. I went to last year in, it's always around Valentine's Day, right? Yeah. It was pretty weird. Yeah. I went with my girlfriend, so it was kind of romantic day. But we got to sit with just some of the most amazing people. We met Leo Busk, the founder of TaskRabbit. We sat about 2 meters away from Reid Hoffman, the guy who started LinkedIn, Mark Tappinger, the guy who, the original founder of Tesla, the guy started EA Games, and it was just an insane event. And apparently next one is going to be like 10,000 people. So.
Absolutely, it's going to be massive. I've also had the opportunity to speak there in 2016.
Yes.
And it was one of those where the founder of YouTube, Steve Chen, comes off stage, and then here's little Sandras.
Yes, Sandras.
From Wakanda. Yeah, and it was really amazing. Like founders of Basecamp and of Box, like their wisdom, their knowledge, and their networking. And one of my highlights was actually to meet, like to be there with Clayton Christensen. He's like the father of innovation in the academic spaces.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, so I mean, I encourage everybody to go, and I think what it did for me was solidify the value of these types of events, and the fact that with an ecosystem, particularly like Cape Town and Silicon Cape, as we like to call it, just this idea of networking and connectivity, and events like Heavy Chef and Startup Grind are so critical to fostering this entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah.
To answer your question,
before we go to the question, how many have been to a Heavy Chef event? Oh, amazing. Okay, we got this morning.
Good to see you guys. I see you. I see the rest of you haven't been. You must come.
So Heavy Chef is like startup grind, but 3 times better.
I don't know about that. It's different, but I'll explain the difference a little bit later. I think to answer your question just very quickly about my formative experience, I had a very privileged background here in South Africa. I was born to Danish immigrants. My mom and dad came from Denmark. They were both born in Copenhagen, which is the capital city of Denmark. Came here. My dad was the CEO of a company called Novo Nordisk in Africa, which is a pharmaceutical company. They sell those little insulin pens and they distributed it through Africa. So I went to school here, studied at CPUT, and then I went to a postgrad in Denmark, where I studied marketing. And it was actually there that I got the kind of entrepreneurial bug and realized that I needed to also come back here, because in Denmark it's quite a mature, very settled and established ecosystem. And looking back here, I thought, you know, it's cheap as there's so much stuff that needs to be done over here, and that I want to just play a tiny little role.
I see. And what did you study at CPUT?
Graphic design, and I also studied marketing as well.
Oh, fantastic. And what kind of student were you? Were they like super student?
I was a shit student. I was the worst student you could possibly imagine. Put it this way, CPUT was like the best years of my life. I made friends. That was pretty much it. I didn't learn anything. I still have a time.
It's like what they say, like go and do the MBA for networking.
Yeah.
That's what you need. You went to CPUT.
I think it planted the seed of the business that I have now, in terms of the prevailing understanding that traditional education doesn't work. It doesn't prepare us for the future. It doesn't prepare us for the age that we're moving into. I do not believe that the way the universities are set up are equipping us with the skills and the tools and the ability to be able to survive and thrive in the fourth industrial revolution.
Absolutely. And yeah, you can clap to that. And when you finished, did you go straight into into setting up a company, or did you get a job first? What was it?
I had tons of jobs. I actually went and I pretty much partied for about a year and a half in London, and I worked as a truck driver, a gardener, a CD packer, a DVD packer. I got promoted. A forklift operator, a barman. I was a bouncer at one place. Worst bouncer ever. I was so friendly to everyone. I worked as a doorman in a restaurant in Copenhagen for a bit. And my job was primarily to keep drunk Swedes or Swedish guys who were coming over the ferry for the weekend from picking up the Danish girls. That was kind of my job, and it was a crazy time, but I think what I was doing was I believe learning how to be a sales guy. So a lot of the stuff that I was doing is all about communicating, interacting, being a waitron, or I've got kids, and I encourage my kids to, when they finish school, and I encourage everybody, actually, anybody who's young, to get a job as a waiter or waitress, because I think it's just the most fundamental building block to interpersonal relationships that you can possibly invest yourself and your time in.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think we have something in common there. Like, I'll make the worst door bouncer. I'll be like saying hello to everybody. Hey, how are you? Good.
Well, I was also a terrible waiter. Let me just say that. I was an awful waiter. Like, I just ended up getting into like long conversations with people, forgetting what the hell they wanted, and making friends.
And then as a barman.
I was an okay barman. I was okay.
Because for me, I think I'll be the one that will be like, hey, it's good to see you again, ma'am. Like, no, it's the first time. Well,
I was young then, so the thing about a barman dispensing wisdom, I think I was was trying to dispense wisdom, but I was not wise. I was pretty stupid. So I was, yeah, I don't know. I think I was good at pouring drinks.
Great. And then when you came back after spending time in Europe, tell us about the journey to IAB and working to set up your advertising.
So I think in Denmark, something extraordinary happened to me. I was studying, I was doing my postgrad in marketing, and whilst it was quite a while ago, it was the sort of late 70s, I was born in the 70s, late 90s, and it was at the time in Denmark, there was live coverage of the, thank you so much, pop it over there. There was live coverage of the TRC hearings, and I don't know if anyone actually ever watched that, but in Denmark it was riveting. I mean, everybody, the entire nation of Denmark, which is about 5 million people, were talking about the TRC hearings in Denmark, and I was sitting, doing my thing as, being this sort of restless wildling in Scandinavia, and then suddenly every now and then, like looking at the TV, watching what was going on back home, and realizing that I really wanted to be part of this whole process of transformation that was going on. And I remember watching Desmond Tutu just bursting into tears, when he was watching some of the confessions and some of the goings on that people were relating. And it was just it was such a profound thing for me to be there and look back and take this kind of almost like a zoomed out perspective back on this country that I'd been brought up in, being this kind of white privileged male, not really knowing what was going on, because I think everyone who, those of you who did live through that time we were so protected, and the media was so controlled, and and then suddenly having it was like the scales removed, and the veil lifted, and you could suddenly see what was going on. So that was a big thing, and then I decided, pretty much I was offered a really cool job after studying in Denmark, going back to into an advertising agency in Copenhagen. And I refused that, and I went back to South Africa to basically get involved and somehow immerse myself in the ecosystem.
Yeah, I see that, and then on your website you actually say I was raised privileged, or I grew up privileged, and you say it again. Well, I found that certain people actually struggle to say that, and say white privileged male.
Sure.
Just to say it, it's difficult, because maybe defining it by negation, like what is privilege? Like a lot of times
Sure.
people think privilege is being super wealthy, or privilege is like, how would you define that for you, and how does it help? How are you working with that?
Well, I think that like the odds are kind of stacked in your favor. If you're sitting in a situation where you kind of brought up and you're sheltered and you're prevented from seeing the truth. I think it's interesting that you bring up this point about it's uncomfortable to talk about these things, and I think it's often uncomfortable to speak about the truth, and hence Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Like there's so much about truth that is so important, and it's also something that entrepreneurs need to embrace. I truly believe that in order for us as a ecosystem, as a sector, as a as a group of people, we need to also encourage each other to live in truth. I think there's a lot of projection, there's a lot of that fake until you make it kind of mentality, and I think you have to start with truth, and that's such a fundamental principle that we need to, particularly in Cape Town and South Africa, and within this little ecosystem that we have. I truly believe that we can be great, but we need to start from a place of truth. We need to understand who we are. There's a self-reflective, introspective process we need to go through. We need to understand who we are, what we are, where we came from. We need to, as you mentioned earlier, Sandras, we need to embrace diversity. And we need to understand what diversity means, what that means from a South African context. and how we can work together, and therefore we can then build upon that truth and build a foundation that's truly unique, I think. You know, if you look at a lot of the ecosystems around the world, many of those ecosystems, like Silicon Valley, like you know, the new like Stockholm and Berlin and Copenhagen and Shoreditch and so on, is very, the ecosystem is very homogeneous. And I think we have something truly unique if we get it right.
Yeah. I think I totally agree, especially on entrepreneurship and speaking your truth and being true. And with a lot of entrepreneurs, there's also the pressure to appear successful, more successful than you really are. Like, we're all concerned about debit orders, you're concerned about how we're going to get the next client, but then say how things great. You know, it's like it's like I equate it to wearing beautiful shoes that are super uncomfortable. You know, everybody's like, wow, oh my gosh, your shoes. But you're like, yeah, thanks. You know? Yeah. As opposed to saying like, yeah, but you know what? I'm feeling like taking off the shoes. Like, why? And then like, oh, then there's now the real conversation. Like, oh, you're looking for that. I can connect you to this person, or I can help you with that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's a weird balance, because we need to get to a point where you need to operate in truth, but I also think that there is this thing of you can't lay that upon people. You know, you can't. I mean, let's face it. Those of you, how many people in the room are actually entrepreneurs? Okay, so quite a few of you, right? I mean, it's flipping hard, right? It's really, really challenging, and that's the truth. The truth is that, you know, it can be freaking miserable. Like, I mean, I was saying to Michael earlier, you know, the energy that it takes to keep on going through all the challenges that we undoubtedly face as entrepreneurs and founders, and, you know, people working within startups and so on. It's so sapping and so draining, and you get to this point where every now and then you just can't anymore, and the energy gets. But the reality is, you don't want to lay that upon everybody. Yeah. So there's a balance that you've got to draw, right? Yeah. And I think I think my advice into that, just to speak into that, is to go to a point where you have a framework around you, people that you can rely on and relay that truth to, and not sort of broadcast into the world. Because the truth is, you got to say these are freaking cool shoes, you know. Absolutely. If you want to sell them, that is.
Absolutely. And regarding that, now we come to that. What's the mindset? What's the advice that you'd have for entrepreneurs? As you said it rightly, and I totally agree that entrepreneurship is hard. So when I'm trying to inspire people to entrepreneurship, I tell them how difficult it is, what it looks like and what it is. Like, I want to control my own time. Like, how many entrepreneurs control their own time? Yeah. I want to determine how much I get paid. Like, how many really determining how much they get paid? But then, like, so there is that. But then also, what other advice would you have for entrepreneurs, like when you're getting into it?
Cheapest. Well, I wrote a book about it. So if you want the longer, expanded version, I do have a book that you can buy at the back. It's 195 Rand, 260 with shipping.
Oh, you could start saying, like,
and spot the sales stuff coming.
Maybe you can say, there are 3 things you should consider. Click here for more. Then pay, enter pay. I'll do that.
Well, I'll give you a few, and then you can read about the rest. So I think, I mean, there's so many things. I think the first thing is to understand what it is and why you're actually doing it. Like, that's an important thing for me, because it's so hard. And we know that it's hard, right? But you've got to know why you're doing it. So that, for me, is a fundamental, foundational principle that you have to embrace right from the start. You need to kind of identify that the underlying drive that you have in order for you to do this and to put yourself through it. Because the reality is, like, it's very, very, very rare that you're going to bubble to the surface and suddenly, like, exit for $100 million. It's just not going to happen to most of you. And I'm sorry, that's the truth. I mean, you're going to struggle to find the success stories commonly appearing within this ecosystem. So I think that once you've embraced that, you've then got to understand that there's got to be something more than just, you know, self-actualization, and that, or at least the baseline needs that you've got to meet. There has to be some form of self-actualization that you have to embrace. So understand why you do it. And I think for me, there is a lot of that in what I do. So with Heavy Chef, I mean, we're not an events company. I mean, that's speaking to the difference about what Heavy Chef does. We're an education platform. So what our big, hairy, audacious goal is we want to turn learning into a lifestyle for entrepreneurs. Our concept essentially is well, let me just say it's predicated on 3 insights. The first insight is that there is people learn best while doing. So there is this thing of, I don't know if you know the term called the experience economy, but we're moving into this thing where experience is so valuable to people, right? So people value experiences more than anything else. And if you think about how often we are subjected to signals through our screens, I mean, we're, as a society, we're subjected to trillions of signals every single month. So people are starting to value the experience more than downloading stuff wrote off the screen, because that's such a commodity now. It's so easy to obtain information that you want something more visceral, more real. So that's the first insight, this insight of people learn best while doing. So hence the name, Heavy Chef. It's a silly name, but it makes people remember it, right? And there's a story behind it. The second insight is that there's an extraordinary amount of people who've done extraordinary things who want to give of their time. So these heavy chefs out there, the people that have eaten their own food, that have, you know, they've dug the trenches, they've done their 10,000 hours, they've walked the talk, practiced what they preach. They're not just talkers, they're doers. These guys out there are willing to give of their time, and it's bizarre, but if you give them the right platform to do it, I mean, it's the same as Startup Grind, right? You're surprised at how many people say yes. You know, in terms of speakers that we have lined up, you know, we've got former President Thabo Mbeki, you know, Sam Parrock again. We've got, you know, we have Adrian Gore, we've got Robbie Brosen, we have. Just Zolani from Freshly Ground. We have just surprisingly awesome speakers. Niket Desai, who sold his company to Google, you know, for an unholy amount of money. He's coming to South Africa to speak at Heavy Chef. These are amazing people that you would never guess would give up of their time. They don't need to. We're not paying them. We can't. We're a startup. But yet they are willing to do that. So that's a second insight. And the third insight is that we're moving as a concept behind education from learning as being a milestone to being a lifestyle. And what that means is that in the old sort of traditional sense of education, we have always thought of education as a box to be ticked, right? So you do your 2-day masterclass, or you do your 6-week online course, or you do your 1-year, you know, foundational year, or your 3-year diploma, or you know, your MBA, or whatever it is. And it's a box. It's an impressive milestone that you've achieved, but it's no longer enough, right? Because if you think about it, what you learn in your first year is redundant by the time you finished your 3rd year. And that's the way the world is moving. We're moving into a revolution. This is a revolution. This is now something where technology is, we're on the cusp of such unbelievable change, the scale and scope and velocity of which is unprecedented. So we have to think differently about how we prepare ourselves and how we learn to embrace the changes that are afoot. And so I believe, and this is what Heavy Chef's third founding insight is really that we need to see education as like as nutrition. or going to the gym. You know, Heavy Chef is what we're trying to create is like a gym for your mind, you know, that you subscribe to and you continue to attend, and you download information, you attend events, you interact with other learners and build the community through that. I don't even remember what your question was.
You've answered it very well.
So
what have been some of your challenges starting Heavy Chef? So there are people who have started businesses, there are people who are starting, there are people who are thinking about starting. What were some of your biggest challenges, and what did you learn?
So it's quite interesting. I mean, when we started Heavy Chef, so I used to run a digital agency, and we grew it, and it became quite a big agency, and we were operating in 17 countries across the continent. We had teams all over the show, and we were doing work for Hyundai, Fashini Group, Vodafone, Apple, Mixed Telematics, listed companies across the banking, financial institutions, and so on. So it was busy.
Yeah.
Is anyone here in advertising or marketing? Okay, so a few of you. So it can be pretty grueling, right? It's like you play subservient agency a lot, and you know, it's like clients say jump, and you got to freaking jump and dance and do whatever it is. And that's pretty much how my life went. And so I ran an agency for 13 years. And so I kind of hit a brick wall, and I could not do it anymore. I resigned from pretty much anything. You mentioned the IAB. I was in the head of agencies for the IAB. Resigned from that. I was a board of a listed company to resign from all of that stuff. Just, I was done with it. I went for sabbatical, went with my girlfriend to the Transkei, and this whole thing of Heavy Chef came up where I wanted to start something afresh. And I thought of creating a non-profit, so like a charitable NGO, NPO sort of thing. And then I thought, you know what, that doesn't work, because if we're going to be heavy chefs, we've got to eat our own food. And so this whole meta thing came along, which is actually quite beautiful in that, you know, if we were going to teach startups how to be startups, we needed to be a startup. And so it was almost inevitable that Heavy Chef had to be a company. So the challenges that any of the people that we're working with, and all the, you know, the guys that come into the events and the master classes and the morning classes and all that, are we're facing the same challenges: scaling, bringing on team members, creating systems, you know, financing the company, you know, just build debtors and creditors, and you know, all the stuff, that the scrappy bits. I mean, I was laughing with you earlier, but I mean, I've come from a place where, you know, I was cruising around doing my thing as the CEO of the agency. Now I'm doing copywriting, I'm doing freaking, you know, phoning people for money, I'm hustling for sales, I'm, you know, training people, setting up systems, I'm coding again, designing again. I've dusted off my old copy of Adobe Fireworks. Anybody is a designer here?
Yeah.
Like, so Fireworks is old school. Like, I keep getting these little pop-ups saying, you know, Adobe no longer supports this software.
They do not. Because I used it when it was Macromedia.
Exactly. So Macromedia. So I was a huge Macromedia loyalist. So the truth is, you know, I'm figuring all this stuff out as I go, and it's I suppose in terms of challenges, I'm facing those same challenges, you know, and it's, I guess it's been quite humbling as well, and I think that has been a thing where I've often realized or thought of this process as being something that, you know, like, why the hell am I doing this? Yeah. And I think a lot of people share that question.
Every month.
Yeah, at the end of the month, right? Yeah.
And what would you say, what would be the ways in which somebody could leverage, or could get free marketing, advertising, like on you got zero budget or very little budget? What are some of the ways in which you could be out there?
Well, I think there's a lot of tools that are available to you now. I mean, obviously social media is a great way of doing that. And also I think it's very important to start small. So in terms of, I mean, because let's face it, nowadays with social media, you know, we've hosted, I think you attended one of the YouTube, the masterclass, and we had Facebook masterclass and a, you know, Instagram masterclass, and you know, there's all these tools available to you, but the reality is you're either really, really unique and distinctive and really good, and your message is so polished, in order for you to bubble to the surface, or you have to spend money. And that's the way those platforms work. So it's tricky. I mean, in terms of guerrilla marketing nowadays, you know, there's ways and means of doing it. We had a Heavy Chef recently where we had these student startups. We had 4 startup founders. Zayo is here. Velo he's the founder of Zayo. He was one of the speakers. And another student startup called Digs Connect, who just recently did a 12 million rand seed round raise. And Alexandria was saying, you know, when they were starting, she's the founder, when they started Digs Connect. Digs Connect.
D-I-G-S.
Yeah.
A lot of people are like,
what did you think I said? I'm not even going to go there.
It was more like the original why Twitter, I mean, what's that? The one where messages disappear? It's other.
Sanders, you filthy animal.
Just clarifying for the
I didn't even go there. So Alexandria, who started Digs Connect, she was talking about the fact that they actually I think they pulled together about 2,000 rand, and they got it in 10 and 20 rand notes, and they threw it into the crowd. And you know, they did activations like that. They did what it took in order for them to gain attention, and that's essentially what you got to do. You got to hustle, you know. So my advice to startups is try and get your idea, the actual product, the thing that you're selling, down to its bare bones basics. Figure out what the baseline actual product is, what problem you're trying to solve, and then don't get distracted by that. Don't get distracted from that. Sorry, because the trap that a lot of entrepreneurs do is they start to bolt on services, because, you know, somebody will ask them, well, hey, can you do this? And then they start doing that, and all of a sudden you feel like butter stretched over toast, you know, and you can't do the things that you really started out to do. And so start with that thing, really refine it, validate that product, and then, you know, it becomes a lot cheaper when you have a simple product to focus on the areas that you know, if you want to sell to the people that really need that, it's a lot more cost effective. So your marketing cost becomes way, way, way more targeted, and therefore, you know, cheaper.
Brilliant. We're going to start taking questions from the audience, so start preparing your questions. And I think I totally agree with you, because I coach and mentor people at different levels, like including CEOs of big companies. But for the medium-sized companies and the people who are starting, a lot of times it's where they are trying to start by solving so many things. Like almost like where they're solving a problem on 2 sides, or they got 3 different market segments to begin, or they want to be an Uber of this and the Airbnb of this and this of that, without actually targeting like one thing. And then when they're trying to create an MVP, you say, this can't be an MVP. It's got so many ambitions.
And I think that's such a critical point, is like figure out what that minimal viable product is. Actually get it down to that simple version, and then be able to iterate. So change fast, you know. So one of the things that we've done is we've partnered with Cliff Central and Discovery, and we're doing this podcast series of interviews. If you want to check it out, The Healthy Business Show, you can search for it online, or go into Apple Podcasts. And Barry Swartzberg, the first guy that I interviewed on that series, he was talking about this thing of, he's the co-founder of Discovery, right? Amazing entrepreneur. Him and Adrian Gore started Discovery, and he mentors a lot of young entrepreneurs. His advice is so startlingly simple. It is, you know, have this baseline product, that you're MVP, and then just start there and just be able to be nimble and agile enough to course correct as your audience needs it, because you'll know, you gather the data, you'll be able to see what people are responding to and what they're not, and change. Be bold enough to change. I think one of the biggest things that he identified, and he mentions in the podcast, is that people get so married to their ideas, they become dogmatic and stick to it. And that's dangerous. You need to be able to be fast in this very fast environment.
Absolutely. One of my friends actually said something which I really like, who is very good with ideation and product development, about ideas. Just confirming that thing about ideas. So one of the biggest mistakes entrepreneurs make is to call ideas your babies. It's very difficult to kill your baby. Okay? And also, it's very difficult for someone to tell you your baby is ugly. So don't call them your babies. Call them your experiments, because you're open to feedback and you're open to changes. Otherwise, you hold on to the death. Like something is not working, and nobody can tell you, like, look, this can't work. And then you put in so much money, and then now you have the sunk cost fallacy, where because you spend so much money, you feel it's too late to jump out and still holding on.
Yeah.
Okay, great. We're going to start taking questions.
Fred, Sanders, hi, my name is Matt. Thanks for engaging with us this evening. It's been very, very cool. Fred, I've got two questions for you. The first is, I'm quite interested to hear about your self-respective, introspective moment moving from Denmark back to SA. What did that look like for you when you were figuring out that why? And do you still apply any of those thoughts or systems today with challenges or areas of transition? And the second one is just a thought around, as you just mentioned now, adapting fast versus sticking it through. I think often we hear, don't give up just yet, don't give up just yet, and hang on. What is perhaps advice or an idea around, letting go of a false fallacy versus like adapt quickly?
Those are both. Well, I really enjoy the second question. I'm going to tackle that first. So, in order to answer that, when do you know when to quit? In other words, and do you keep iterating until you've just got this kind of weird plasticine thing that doesn't look like anything that you initially thought of? And I think the key thing for me is to have people around you that you trust and respect. And so that's one of the things that I've been very fortunate enough is to always have people that are really smart and really really brutal around me, that I keep sense testing and sense checking what it is that I'm doing with them. So I'm very, anyone who's really good friends with me knows that I'm quite dogmatic and I'm quite bombastic and I'm quite convincing as well. So like I'll flip and tell you why this thing is going to work. And so there's a bunch of people that I have around me that they know me and they're like, dude, you're being a freaking idiot, like don't do that. And I really appreciate that from them. So I think it's part of this concept of a framework that I'll use to answer your first question. So the Denmark thing was actually a really dark time for me. And it was kind of weird because growing up, like again, privilege and yada yada, all that stuff, I was going into a situation where I didn't really have a lot to complain about. And something that I come across increasingly nowadays is people suffering from anxiety or depression. It happens, nearly every single week, somebody, a friend or an associate or a friend of a friend or somebody who I work with or someone that I counsel or chat to has been struck by anxiety or depression. And it feels like there's this global pandemic at the moment. So at that stage in Denmark, I fell into depression, and it was weird. It came out of nowhere. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know why. And it was quite a while ago. So it took its course over a period of about maybe 8 or 9 months, where I could hardly leave the flat that I was in. And at that stage, I was like very outgoing, very gregarious, very. Like I had a lot of mates, and I just retreated into the shell, and I couldn't understand why. Anyway, it turned out that I was struck by anxiety, and I think there was part of this identity crisis that I was going through. It was like a quarter-life crisis or something, like something freaking hit me hard. And apparently Denmark is famous for it. Like a lot of people in Scandinavian countries face this. So I didn't know what the hell was going on. I'd never even really thought about anxiety. I just had this carefree life. So it was really, really, really challenging for me, and so it was also quite a big pivotal moment for me, changing my life. And fortunately, I got through it, and I think out of that experience, I managed to figure out this thing that has worked for me, which I just call the framework. It's essentially this foundation of kind of like spiritual beliefs, family values, choices that I make, people that I hang out with, aligned to this, these kind of things that I hold on to of the work that I do, the exercise that I do, the food that I eat, and then on top of that, my ambitions, travel, more self-actualization kind of stuff. And I always keep sense checking that. Today, every day, I go back to a journal. I write about what I'm grateful for, and I really mean it. Like, I look at what I'm no matter what's happening. And again, entrepreneurship is flipping hard, and every day you get your challenge. And life is pretty freaking complicated as well. So you've always got to check back in, and that gives me the gift of perspective. But a big part of that framework as well is the people that I hang out with. So I really am quite conscious of ensuring that I've got people who are strong and who can tell me like when I'm being a dick or if I'm doing something right, and I really respect that, and it gives me that sustenance, and I think you need that, you need people around you just to connect with. And I encourage all entrepreneurs to start making those choices, because that's all a framework is making those choices. Is figure out who it is that you hang out with, who it is that you bring on your team, who it is that you engage with outside of your team, who it is that you ask for advice, and who it is that you ask to mentor you, because those are critical choices that will stand you in good stead going forward.
Cool. Can I say something? Talking about people who help you and guide you and support you. That one person, that the work that my company does, most of it is financial education, and we do that across the country, different universities, and we have big corporates as clients. But the first event we ever did was here. It was the watershed, to like dingy, and the person that started doing the programs was my wife. And the person who said, "Hey, just start," was Gwen. Gwen right here. Thank you, Gwen. So Gwen just said, "Let's start," and we start there like there was no air conditioning, so like 3 people, 4 people, and it was the first workshop. And now to do workshops across the country, but people don't see that, and they mean somebody and just say, "Hey, let's do it." No, go ahead and take pictures of the 3 people. Thank you, Gwen.
Thank you. I'm Dobeko from Ben Peter. Fred, thank you for the beautiful message. And I must say you did the right thing by naming your company Heavy Chef. The only reason I came here tonight, I thought there was going to be free food.
There's going to be free. It's a trick.
So that was that's a good choice. I've got 2 questions. You are doing beautiful things as Heavy Chef. I mean, when you mention the name of President Mbeki and Adrian Gore, those are big names, and you still call yourself a startup. Is there a definition of a startup? And when does a startup stop being a startup?
That is a great question. I think there's an authoritative guide to it.
Yes, that's the first.
That's the first question.
Yes. The second one, you made an unfortunate statement when you said...
I make loads of unfortunate statements. You should hang out with me often.
Yes. I call it unfortunate because you started by saying, unfortunately, not all of us here will make, those hundreds of $1 million exits. Now, my question is that statement a fact? Or is that dependent on the choices that we make? Sandra's mentioned, and you also mentioned how hard entrepreneurship is. And life is a series of choices. And I think at any given time you have two choices. The hard choice of something that is important and right, or the easy choice of something that will give you quick gratitude. So if all of us here would make those difficult, correct choices, wouldn't we all make those hundreds of millions?
Since it's a trick question. So I think you're right. Like what I mean, let me maybe qualify it. What I mean by that is you're welcome to make $100 million, and I encourage you to visualize it and put it on your fridge and to make that as an outcome. But it can't be the thing. So for me, and I truly believe this, it should never be about the money, because if it is just about the money and the exit, you're always going to feel like it's not enough. So if it's $100 million that you're exiting, when you make that $100 million, you're going to think, oh, I didn't make $1 billion, And I think that it has to be more. And so your purpose, your meaning, your cause, and I'm a big believer in social entrepreneurship. It doesn't have to be, but I think that there is now, we're moving into an age where so many people want something that they can align themselves with and believe in. And if you want to create a sustainable organization, it has to be something that has a true purpose, meaning, a cause at its center. And if you don't have one, make something up. Like feel what actually does resonate with you, and then work towards that, because it's going to be really tough to build a team that's loyal to you if there is nothing to work for. If it's just about the money, then it is just about you. And I think that's part of what I mean by that. However, I think if you do that and you are able to keep it simple, keep it focused, and scale that simple, focused idea, then you will make $100 million. There's no reason why you can't. But it's hard to do that.
It's hard.
It's very difficult to be focused. I know that. Like at Heavy Chef, we get pulled every which way. And, there's a lot of demand on my time, and it's difficult for me to be focused. So I understand that, but it's certainly not about the money. But there's absolutely no reason why you can't make $100 million. And I believe that there's a lot of people here that can, you included. And I think there's a fire in the eyes of many of entrepreneurs that it just astounds me. But we need to get good in South Africa, in Cape Town, and in our community at doing the basics right. The technical fundamentals of entrepreneurship, we've lost a lot of that because we don't have this kind of community. We haven't fostered it yet. I think Startup Grind, Heavy Chef, there's a couple of others, Future Females, there's some great, Startup Bootcamp. There's a bunch of great organizations, Bandwidth Barn, the work that Workshop 17 is doing. Yoko, with it, you mentioned Just Start, Yoko's doing a campaign now called Just Start. There's a lot of stuff that's starting to happen. It's an extremely exciting time. And I do believe there will be a few $100 million exits. I mean, watch Intersect, for example. I think, they're on track to be a unicorn. Look at iExperience. There's a bunch of guys here that are doing such wonderful work that I truly believe that they're going to make some pretty astounding valuations quite soon. So that's the second question. The first question is when is a startup, and when is it stop being a startup? I think there is a technical, I can't remember what it is, but I think it's like 7 years or something like that. 7 years, and most of the time it's you kind of allude to it as a tech startup, but nowadays every company is a tech company. If you're not embracing tech, then you're not a company. So I think that's the technical explanation. The more philosophical one is again alluding to the interview with Barry Swartzberg, co-founder of Discovery. I asked him a similar question. He was saying, well, Discovery, right, which I think is 30 years old now, and it owns it. I think it's 80% of the South African market, and it's massive overseas now. He still deems it to be a startup. So I think startup is also a mentality and an attitude. So you can also apply that upon yourself.
I'm going to make these really savvy so someone else can ask questions.
Yeah.
Chantal Wilson, is she still here? Hello. I saw your name on the board, so can we chat afterwards? Thanks.
Is that what you wanted to do, or is that what you want to say?
First question. Second question. My name is Sean, by the way, from Video. I'm having a bit of a problem of being an entrepreneur coming from a startup mentality, and always have been, you know. And now convincing and chatting to investors who have come into the company, who come from more of a traditional background of business. And they're like, dude, what's this? You know, there's a huge divide, and I'm sure it's quite difficult for a lot of people or startup entrepreneurs who have come to that stage and trying to convince your investors who are now have seen the bright light of the company. But what is your advice on the startup entrepreneur mentality, moving, kind of educating an investor who, I mean, yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough one at this point.
Yeah. I think we can all identify with that. Look, so I don't think that's unique to South Africa. I think that's. I listened to a podcast with, I think it was, it might have actually been Leah Busk from TaskRabbit, who I mentioned earlier, but it was in Masters of Scale with Reid Hoffman, and she was saying, well, you know, I had something like 97 no's before I got a yes to the first, the first investment, and the reason for that was that education thing. And I think with her it was microjobbing and just like trying to explain what this thing of the microjobbing and little tasks, task economy and all that just didn't make sense to people. So what you've got to try and do, and I think she was quite eloquent in describing it, was that you need to find the point of relevance or resonance with the person that you're speaking to. So if you're talking about, in your case, very fast turnaround video that scales quickly and it's done very cost efficiently, and anyone can do it, but nobody does it well, and those sort of things. An investor who's coming from a corporate finance background is going to look at that and go, well, I mean, what's to stop anybody coming in competing with you? So you need to figure out what that resonance with your investor would be. It could be your platform, could be the tools, it could be the thing that helps you scale, it could be the community, the influences that you have. Whatever it is, you've got to describe it from their point of view. So I think that's something that every entrepreneur needs to understand, is to be able to articulate, first of all, what the problem is they're trying to solve, and then articulate the solution in a way that the person you're speaking to gets it. And that's hard, and it's,
Because I'm being asked to build business plans again. I'm like, mate, this is a startup world. We use pitch decks these days. Very old school, traditional business. Yeah, it's tough. But thanks. Great advice.
Cool.
Yeah.
Hi there, my name's Robin. I run a small agency for entrepreneurs. And my question to you would be when you started out, how did you scale your business without having to go and pitch?
Heavy Chef or the agency? Okay. So Heavy Chef is still small, whereas we are genuinely tiny. I mean, I think we've got 9 members in the team, and we've got 5 full-time employees, and yeah, so we are small. We've grown though quite rapidly in 2 years, because we founded the company 2 years ago, and I think we had a database of about 1,500 people. We're closing in on 30,000 people in terms of subscribed members, and I think there's the challenges. Again, just to reiterate that point of trying to make it something that people can identify with. So right from the start, the Heavy Chef story, I mean, Sandras did the job of telling the story. It comes from the saying, never trust the skinny chef, and it means eating your own food and walking the talk and so on and so forth. I've said that so many times, almost I get tired of my own voice when I say it, but it's an important part of it. You've got to be able to have a story to tell, say that enough times, be able to articulate it so that, again, it solves a problem, and you know, that the solution is self-evident, and then it starts to scale. If it sticks, if it's meaningful, if it really has value, it'll start to do the job for you.
And so you've done this round differently to when you first started your first agency?
Well, it doesn't feel like it. When I did the agency, I hustled, you know, knocked on doors, did what it took. I think there's a great story of Airbnb, right? I don't know if everyone's heard the story where, you know, I think it was Y Combinator, and Paul Graham said to some guys, you know, you need to go to New York because that's where the first little bites were coming from. And it was tiny. I mean, there was like a handful of people, but there was strong feedback, and, you know, so they went there. And then they themselves, the founders of Airbnb, went around, knocked on doors, took photos, you know, and they hustled. And I think that's the part that entrepreneurs, I think a lot of entrepreneurs don't realize, is how much actual footwork is required, the hustle that's actually you have to put in order for it to succeed. And often, you know, that takes a while, because again, you're course correcting all the time, you're figuring it out. And whilst you're in it, again, Heavy Chef is about eating your own food and doing, you're learning as you go out there whilst in the field.
Thanks.
Thank you. We'll take the last two questions, then there'll be more networking afterwards.
Great, fantastic. Thanks so much for the chat so far. My name is Meg. I think there's a lot of people that are probably in the beginning of starting a business, or maybe, you know, working their way through it. And we all need mentors. And I was wondering if there isn't a gap for Heavy Chef to get some people that are retired and have walked this walk already and are wanting to pay it forward and help some of us that are new in this walk. If there's some kind of way to set up that, even like a speed dating thing.
That's a great point. I get asked that probably about twice a week now about the mentor thing, and I think it's such the reason why people are asking is because people need it so much, and I believe that it's a hugely underserved need. But the reality is it's tough to do that because so many people do, you know, it's like. It's tough to create that in a scaled, reliable, and accountable way. You know, in terms of, you know, who are we to say, you know, this person should be a mentor? Because it's tough to vet that and to figure out who should be a mentor. You know what I mean? So the dating service idea, I think, is great, but that's also a different business. So whether or not we do that or not. Look, what we are doing is we're, on the 1st of August, we're launching our subscription. So, I mean, our business model is super simple. We do learning experiences. The first phase was to build a brand and the community. The second phase was to offer as much value as possible. We're now entering the third phase, which is the subscription. So that's 1st of August, and therefore, within that, we're going to invite a test group of people to start experiencing a kind of all-you-can-eat experience of Heavy Chef. See what I did? And so essentially, I think what that means is that the mentorship will be baked in terms of peer-reviewed mentorship, as opposed to putting up these kind of gurus, you know. And I'm wary of gurus. My mentors are sometimes younger than me, you know. I have a group of people that I rely on. Like Siyabonga. Siyabonga, you're my mentor, babe.
That was my other part of the question. Are your mentors organically, do they become your mentors organically, or is it something that you have formally set up?
I don't really even call them mentors. I have different people that I lean on for different things. So some people I have a lot of technical requirements, and I've got, you know, people that I rely on for that. I'm, you know, quite spiritually inclined, so I have people for that, and you know what I mean. So I try and, again, it's that part of that framework that the choices that you make that I think are critical in terms of setting it up for you. It is possible. Just look around you. You don't have to have like an Adrian Gore, for example, as a mentor. You can have somebody that you know, that you trust and you believe in, and that you find value in.
Hi, Chris from Visual Design Studio. Just a quick question in terms of your take on traditional employment versus going sort of the virtual model or outsourcing all your workforce. Just what is your take on that from your experiences with both your companies?
Sure, it's a great question as well. I think there's so currently I'm in favour of a sort of blended model, but I'm a huge fan of remote working. So the agency that I ran, we had a building in Roed where everybody was together. It was kind of open office, and everybody kind of threw paper jets across the the studio at each other, and it was great. However, Heavy Chef we're trying to create this blended version of that. So we have the opportunity to go and work from wherever. So everybody has their own equipment and data and all that kind of stuff. But we meet once a week, and then we have a series of meetings through the week and when, as and when. And so I'm experimenting with the structure. What we're doing is at Heavy Chef. We are deploying a lot of cloud systems, so things like Trello. We were using Slack, but it's too noisy for me. So just Trello, G Suite, and G Suite now has this wonderful, very integrated suite of tools like chat and Drive and storage stuff, all the software that you need and whatnot, and you can collaborate with that. So I'm a big believer in being able to allow people the freedom, and if you're going to employ people, treat them like adults. So, and I think that does tend to work. However, proximity is important, so keeping people together for certain periods is also, I believe, quite vital. So hence that blended thing. With regards to outsourcing, I think it depends on what, So you can outsource certain things like, design. I'm a huge fan of outsourcing design. Dev, it's tricky, if there's proximity and you can speak to the person, then fine. But where's Angelo? But I think if you, at Worldwide Creative, Angelo is a huge outsourced solution for us, and he's got an amazing dev shop where they could build anything, and there was a beautiful relationship between us where we could chat to him, see him, phone him, talk to him. I think we tried, Ukrainian developers and Indian developers and that's really tough. So in terms of, I don't know, there's a lot of people in the crowd who might want to do apps, build their own sites and all that. I would start local and then potentially expand, but it depends on what you want to build.
Great. A big hand for the Heavy Chef.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.